this fall returns is water to the earth below where water fills.
I'm Scott Ennis. I set out to make a documentary of waterfalls of the Pacific Northwest. Humans find tranquility in them and their sound. I am a poet and a lyricist. If waterfalls can teach or inspire me in my craft, I want to know more about them. As I considered proximity, psychology, and musicality, I searched for something to tie them all together, a golden thread, if you will. What I discovered on my journey of research, travel, filming, and interviewing is that I am the common element, the golden thread that ties together the proximity, psychology, and musicality of waterfalls. Like most people, I find beauty and psychological awe in the presence of waterfalls.
The draw to the waterfalls for me has to do with the awe, the awesomeness of the water, and it certainly has to do with the fact that it's something coming from high up to down low, which is very spiritual, almost religious, when you consider how people believe that things, blessed things, come from high up to them down below. We're looking at the psychological impact of waterfalls, and it's been found that there are cancer centers that will play sounds of water, waterfalls, ocean, and it reduces the stress levels in patients, okay? Right. So, curious about, your experience with Solduck. How do you feel?
Well, in general, this whole forest has a particular feeling that we find to be very spiritual, and Solduck, the falls as well. And water, I believe that water has always been a healing source, so I agree with that. I think it is a very healing source.
The trees themselves are living beings, and they live because of the water in this area.
So you're former Army, and much of the Olympic Peninsula was charted by Lieutenant O'Neill. Do you feel any military, any Army connection, any elemental connection with the teachings or with the exploration of waterfalls and the documentary that you're doing? I mean, just as O'Neill explored this, do you feel, I don't know, a kinship, whatever, a golden thread, a tie?
I do sense that golden thread in that aspect. I think that, and I know that there are a lot of veterans who suffer traumatic brain injuries during combat, And this is a beautiful place where I believe that they could come to experience the water, the growth, the healing that is part of this national park.
Feel kind of outside of myself. They're just so amazing. I just kind of lose myself and kind of stop thinking about everything else and just pay attention to the waterfall. It's kind of completely involved and it takes all my attention. It's a great feeling.
And you can run anywhere, obviously, and Wasatch Wobble. Have you done the 100?
I got the Seashed Goodwill.
Oh.
But no, I've done some long runs, yeah.
So you can run anywhere.
Yeah.
Why run here? Why run near waterfalls?
Oh, this is actually the most incredible run I think that I've ever done. I try to come back here every year. This was this run, the High Divide Loop, is when I really kind of everything clicked for me in terms of trail running. And since then, a few years ago, it's just kind of all I've wanted to do. So I've gotten much more into it, and I think a lot of it does have to do with the waterfalls, just the whole environment, the old growth forest, and just loving. I just love to see rivers flowing freely without dams, without obstructions, and I think waterfalls kind of really encapsulates.
How do you feel?
Relaxed. Even after a long crazy hike with an almost 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and rocks and hills, and I feel peaceful.
Do you feel like the waterfall has helped with that? Or how has?
Yes, I feel like the waterfall has helped with a sense of peacefulness, and that it reminds me, it restores faith in me. Everything flows. The water is flowing. We'll make it back to the car safely. There might be some tears, there might be some bumps, there might be some creations of the waterfall on the trail back, but we'll make it because the flow is there and it never stops.
Waterfalls are always beautiful to look at.
Do you notice any shifts in either body or mind when you're around waterfalls or water in general?
It's just so serene. It's calming. I have a pretty stressful job, so coming out into the woods, we hike a lot at home too, and coming out into the woods just calms me, soothes me.
Yeah. But I think even hearing just the sound of the water, we've got a little water feature in our backyard, even that alone makes such a difference in what you experience. And so when you hear this and you see this, it does, kind of refill you.
It's beautiful. It's a historic place. There's so much history and so much spirit here, both recorded and not recorded history, and certainly recorded in the forest itself. The trees themselves are living beings, and they live because of the water in this area.
My next waterfall experience outside of the Pacific Northwest was at the world-famous Niagara Falls. In 2008, I was training to compete in the Ironman triathlon. My training schedule called for me to do a 20-mile run on a weekend I was visiting Niagara. Ironically, the Niagara Falls Marathon was being held that weekend, so I thought, it's only an extra 6.2 miles. I ran the Niagara Falls Marathon fast enough to qualify me to run the Boston Marathon the month before I did the Ironman triathlon. While researching the psychology of waterfalls, I learned of an author who has written about the psychological effect of water on humans in a New York Times bestseller, The Blue Mind. I met Jay for lunch in Seattle to get his thoughts on waterfalls. Basically, is a waterfall musical?
Yeah.
And
yeah. So that I think the connection between the people who study your brain on music and the people who study, the very few people who study your brain on water is quite real. There's an auditory component. There's a rhythm. There's a rhythmic component, particularly when it involves the ocean, it involves waves. And then there are notes. There's a symphony that you can hear in water. That's far less organized, obviously, than a rock band or a symphony. But it's there nonetheless, and it influences your emotions much in the same way music does. So a minor key or a major key or a quick rhythm or a slow rhythm, a group of musicians that get into what we refer to as the groove, well, you know that as a listener. You get into the groove too.
Jay's comments about musicality in water got me thinking about my own musicality. As a poet and lyricist, I wondered if waterfall noise might be music. Although I didn't discover any music directly in the waterfalls I visited, I was inspired to write a waterfall sonnet, a word that comes from the Italian sonetto meaning little song. This is the story of how I discovered my place with regard to the waterfalls of the Pacific Northwest.